In a world overflowing with information, few now turn to books for answers. Once, reading was the heartbeat of civilization, a source of meaning and of wisdom, but today it languishes in neglect, replaced by scrolling screens and endless distraction. Yet the reason behind reading's decline is not accidental, it was engineered. Stay with me as we uncover how society systematically trained generations to despise reading and how we might yet reclaim this lost art. Prepare yourself, because we are about to diagnose a crisis at the very heart of our culture.
There was a time when reading was joy itself, a quiet communion between the individual and the infinite voices of generations past. Books once invited readers into private worlds, opening doors to wisdom, wonder, and worlds beyond mere existence. Yet something sinister occurred, something systematic, almost industrial, that snatched away reading's joy and replaced it with dread. Consider how we are introduced to reading. The classroom transforms words into a compulsory chore, an obligation enforced by anxiety and shame. Students find themselves obligated to dissect novels like frogs pinned on laboratory tables. Instead of breathing life into Shakespeare's verses or savoring Hemingway's clipped rhythms, they memorize dates and dissect plots to pass examinations. The original enchantment of words, those elegant keys to imagination, fades rapidly when compelled by the brute machinery of standardized tests. Soon, books cease to be friends, and reading becomes an adversary to outwit, a tedious task to endure. From the first forced book report to the final exam's forced interpretations, the young mind learns to associate literature not with adventure, but with punishment and humiliation. Teachers, following the rigid syllabi and soulless curricula imposed from above, become unwitting agents of disenchantment. They turn what was sacred into something mundane and mechanical. Gradually, the very idea of picking up a book voluntarily becomes absurd to those who see it only as toil, torment, or a threat to their self-esteem. This is no accident of individual teachers or isolated school districts. This is structural, embedded deep within the heart of modern educational philosophy. And unless recognized, unless confronted, it will continue to drain society's lifeblood, curiosity, imagination, and intellectual freedom. It is tempting to blame technological distraction alone for our abandonment of reading. Screens and scrolling certainly play their part, yet beneath surface appearances lies a deeper truth. The abandonment of reading did not arise merely from digital temptations. It was cultivated through generations by an education system blind to the spiritual and emotional dimensions of learning. The modern educational model emerged from industrial principles: efficiency, uniformity, quantification. Schools organized to produce predictable outcomes. Literature became a problem. It resisted objective quantification. Stories do not neatly yield standardized scores or consistent meanings. Literature asks for empathy, introspection, moral imagination. Such things defy easy measurement or bureaucratic oversight. Hence, the school system reshaped reading to fit into neat industrial boxes. Literature classes became reading comprehension exercises. Books were reduced to measurable outcomes: standardized testing, prescribed answers, structured analysis. This industrial logic strips away ambiguity and erases pleasure. Students trained to respond predictably become less readers than technicians. They learn not to love words, but to perform interpretative tricks for external approval. Herein lies the tragedy. Real reading demands space, quietude, openness to uncertainty and contradiction. It cannot be hurried nor standardized. The schooling model, built for control, measurement, and predictability, cannot accommodate such subtleties. Over time, the structural nature of schooling itself, subtly but persistently, trains young minds to regard reading as unnatural, burdensome, alien. Thus, entire generations have been conditioned to recoil from books. They associate reading not with freedom or wonder, but anxiety and failure. Literature, in its truest sense, threatens the system's neat calculations and rigid categories. So reading's transformative potential is methodically suppressed. What follows when a society systematically extinguishes reading's joyous fire? The consequences run deeper than mere declining literacy statistics. The loss of reading carries profound civilizational implications. Books are a culture's collective memory, repositories of insight, wisdom, and beauty. A culture detached from reading is severed from its own roots and heritage. Without reading, our communal memory grows shallow and brittle. Without books, society loses its ability to sustain nuanced dialogue and measured reflection. Public discourse degrades into shallow argumentation and knee-jerk emotionalism. Observe the contemporary landscape. Arguments become shouting matches. Debate yields to tribalism. Without the shared reference points, shared narratives, and nuanced moral visions that books provide, people lose the capacity to engage each other meaningfully. Society fragments into isolated enclaves, each blind to the other's perspective. Reading trains citizens not merely to decode letters, but to decode human experience itself. It teaches empathy, complexity, depth of thought. Without it, people become intellectually vulnerable, easily manipulated by slogans, propaganda, simplistic rhetoric. Democracy itself becomes fragile in a society unable to sustain complex discussions. Literature's abandonment thus poses a direct threat to civic health, intellectual freedom, and social cohesion. Yet the tragedy goes further still. On a spiritual level, reading connects individuals to transcendent values, higher truths, lasting beauty. Without reading, culture grows superficial and spiritually impoverished. Art and beauty lose their resonance, becoming mere commodities for fleeting entertainment. Society forgets how to listen quietly, patiently, to ancient voices, deep truths, eternal insights. This cultural corrosion is structural and intentional. A people trained to despise literature become passive consumers, obedient citizens, not critical thinkers. They accept narratives handed down from authority without question. A civilization that ceases to read willingly forfeits its intellectual sovereignty and moral imagination, quietly accepting a degraded, diminished state. Yet hope remains, even amid the ashes. If our decline stems from a systematic structural problem, then its reversal demands deliberate action. To reclaim reading is to reclaim our autonomy, our imagination, our very civilization. If you believe in this revival, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join a community committed to cultural renewal. Restoring literature to its rightful place requires dismantling the machinery that killed joy in the first place. Schools must cease treating reading as compulsory labor. Literature curricula must shift from standardized examinations toward free, open-ended exploration. Teachers must become facilitators of joy, guiding students toward personal connections and authentic engagements with books. Education must abandon industrial logic and return to spiritual, emotional nourishment. Outside the classroom, our culture must nurture reading as essential spiritual sustenance. Families must make space for quiet reading. Society must celebrate books, not as status symbols or sources of credentialing, but as invaluable companions. Bookshops and libraries should become centers of communal gathering, vibrant intellectual sanctuaries, rather than lifeless relics. The task is enormous, but necessary. Civilization hinges on it. No culture survives long without stories, imagination, wisdom from the past. Each of us must personally embrace reading anew, modeling it openly and joyously for younger generations. It is not enough to mourn the loss. We must actively recover reading's lost prestige personally and collectively. We stand at a cultural crossroads. Our choices today will determine whether literature revives or dies permanently. Choosing to reclaim reading means choosing freedom over conformity, imagination over mechanization, cultural flourishing over structural decline.
Thank you for joining me on this exploration into why our society turned away from reading and how we can revive it. Remember, reclaiming literature means reclaiming our intellectual and spiritual heritage. It demands courage, conviction, and a willingness to dismantle the very systems that robbed reading of its joy. And if you found truth in this message, then like the video and subscribe to the channel, and share it widely with others who care about restoring meaning, depth, and beauty to our civilization. Until next time, pick up a book and try to rediscover what your female English teacher killed long ago.